Welcome to the Preserving Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to equip you to gain insight, information, and inspiration to help you protect, teach, and guide your family during these turbulent times. Our goal is to provide tools and resources to help you strengthen and preserve your own marriages and families. Now here are your hosts, Dr. Mark and Janie Ogletree.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. We're excited for our topic and our special guest that's coming soon. But before we do, we just want to remind everyone of our church history trip, August the 6th through 11th. Still a few spots left. Email us if you're interested at preservingfamiliespodcast@gmail.com. But right now, Janie, we should dive right into the topic of why in the world are family meals so important.
Family meals are very important. I think it's an awesome time to bond together as a family. It's a one time during the day that we can gather. Hopefully we have more than once, but usually for a lot of families, it's maybe one time a day that we can bond, that we can share experiences, that we can talk as a family.
It's where you kind of can learn from your children what's going on in their lives and what some of their challenges are, but what's fun. What happened today that you enjoyed?
It gets kids talking as they're eating.
Right.
And we love talking and eating, so both of those together are a great combination.
I like what you said as a bonding time, and it really is. But here's what we're worried about is it's becoming lost. Right? I mean,
families don't eat together anymore with
right.
just our crazy schedules, but there are so many benefits that scientists and behavioral studies have shown that if you eat together as a family, that, again, it doesn't have to be a gourmet. It could be a pizza, right? It could be peanut butter and jelly. It doesn't have to be gourmet, but if you eat together, there's so many benefits.
Right. Let's just talk about a few of those just for a minute. For physical health, obviously better nutrition, but children who eat together, studies show that children who are, of course, are eating with their families or families who are eating together, there is less obesity in those families. Lower obesity rates among children. In fact, they're 12 times less likely to be overweight if they eat together with their families 3 or 4 more times a week. It also is a way to reduce eating disorders. So there's just some physical health benefits.
And we talked about stronger family connections, just having that time every day where we can gather together and catch up, spend time together. Increased parental awareness. We know what's going on in our kids' lives. We hear about their friends, what's going on at school, the teacher that they hate, or the struggles they're having with friends or whatever. We hear all those stories at dinner. And so it's a great way to catch up with our kids.
It is. In fact, can you believe that there's a study called the Family Dinner Project? I mean, this is really a big area of research, and one of those points is that 71% of teenagers say that they consider talking, catching up, and spending time with their family to be the very best part of family dinners. There are also some great mental health benefits. For example, this research study in the Journal of Adolescent Health just recently reported that teenagers who eat with their families 5 or more times a week are 35% less likely to engage in disordered eating and 24% more likely to have a positive self-image. Also, by eating together as families, it reduces the symptoms of anxiety and depression. In fact, this study shows that teenagers who eat dinner with their families are 40% less likely to experience symptoms of depression and more likely to be emotionally content. There's also evidence that those teenagers who are eating meals with their family are less likely to engage in substance abuse.
There's also academic and social benefits that we'll run through really quick, but they have higher academic performance. So children and teens who have frequent meals with their families score higher on tests and are more likely to graduate from high school, which was from a Harvard study, which is pretty
significant.
Powerful.
Yeah.
They have improved vocabulary. Young children learn 1,000 more rare words at the dinner table than they do from just storybook reading or hearing words at school. But if they're associating with their parents and talking at a higher level, that's amazing that they're learning that many more words. Stronger social skills. Family meals encourage better communication skills and higher emotional intelligence in children. So there's so many benefits.
Well, that's a great benefit because we've been talking lately about helping the next generation of missionaries out there connect socially to people because we know that's a problem. And maybe it starts right there at the family dinner table.
Yeah, and I think it starts by making that a no phone zone for everyone, parents included. Let's put our phones down. let's just talk as a family. We've talked about this topic before, but again, I think it bears repeating because it's so important. It's such an important time of day. And even if it's 15 minutes on the way out before everybody scatters to all their practices and different things. But if we take the time to just focus on our family, say a blessing on the food, address God, and then focus on our family, what a beautiful time to spend, even if it's just a short amount of time on our family.
Yeah.
And I might have shared this before, but the greatest example that I've seen of a family that does this or did this faithfully is I used to teach them several years ago, and they had 11 children in their family. And she was so committed to family dinner and gathering all of her chickens under her wings, and having dinner, that it didn't matter if it was at 5 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Sometimes it was an 11 o'clock at night. If that was when the last person came home, they would get the babies up, they would get everyone up, and they would have a meal together. When I was a young mom, I thought that is crazy. I wouldn't wake up my young kids to do that for anything, but now I'm kind of seeing the benefits of it. Right. They were so committed to having that precious family time together where they could all sit around the table together, share what was going on in each other's lives, interact with each other, have the siblings interact, the parents hear what was going on, the conversation, that she had such a commitment towards it that it really, now I'm thinking, wow, that is amazing. They
didn't let anything get in the way. And I think that once again, as we've already mentioned, but it is so hard today as parents are running in 12 different directions every night of the week. This is one of the things that we're losing. But now think of all those benefits that the research is telling us about. And it's like, really, do you want to really put your children at risk for drug use and poor academic performance and the lack of social skills and all these great benefits, mainly just family connection and teaching? I mean, to us, Janie, as I look back on it, that was always a chance for us to kind of share stories and experiences and share some life lessons at the dinner table.
Right, because always somebody would have had something happen that day on the playground, or an interaction with a friend, or somebody, because we lived in Texas at the time, somebody questioning them about our faith, or why are you a Mormon, or Mormons have horns, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that was usually very common to have that discussion at our dinner table, where we then could talk about it. And how did you address it? What did you say? And here's what the scriptures say, or here's what our church teaches. And it was a time of family bonding and a wonderful time to teach our children and kind of buoy them up and get ready to send them back out to the world on the next day. So yeah, we are very, very big proponents of family mealtime. And that's why we are so excited for our guest today.
Amen. So we want to welcome Susan Christensen here today. Susan, thank you for riding your bicycle over here today, all the way up the hill.
All the way up the hill.
We are so grateful. We'll do more by way of introduction, but we're grateful for the Christensens. They've been friends of ours for a long time, and I was going to say that, Janie, one of my first memories, we moved into this ward in June of 2011, and Susan was the first person to come up to us and make us feel welcome and invited our daughters to go on a trek, I think, or girls' camp. Which was it?
It was trek. Yeah.
Yeah, and you came over and visited her several times to a very unwilling daughter who was terrified to move to a new place, and you made her feel so welcome, and we've been grateful for you ever since. So.
Oh, well, thank you. I have very good memories of that trek.
Yeah, it changed her life. So, Susan, we are so grateful that you're here today. She is an expert at dinner time and building character through dinner time, and she's got this awesome book that just came out, and so we're so excited to have you here to tell us all about it. But before, will you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself?
I will, absolutely. Thank you to the Ogletrees. They are also beloved in our neighborhood and community, and I'm really thrilled to be here on your podcast.
Thank you for coming.
I love that your podcast is called Preserving Families, and before we get into that, I will introduce myself. My husband and I have been married 43 years. We were both from Arizona originally, and now we live in Utah, and we love the seasons and the snow and all those good things about Utah. We have 6 kids and 7 grandchildren, and they are the light of my life. And honestly, I wrote this book, Character at Dinner, because even if no one else reads it but my posterity, it will be a worthwhile endeavor for me.
Oh, what a blessing.
Well, you're on our page. We always think if only our kids listen to this podcast, we'll be okay with that,
it's
right?
worth all the effort and sacrifice. But what a treasure. As we have read through this, what a blessing for your posterity. So, Susan, how did your personal journey start? with this book, and how did you become interested or passionate about this topic?
Oh, that's a great question. I was thinking about this as I was preparing for this, and I remember, do you remember that movie Home Alone?
Oh, yeah.
It came out, I think, around 1992 or 1993. And, of course, out of the whole movie, my son, there's a part where there's an old movie, and the character says, "Keep the change, you filthy animal."
Yeah.
And my 3-year-old started repeating that all the time. And I was like, where did he get that? And it was kind of like my first glimpse into almost, and it's a funny thing to say, but my experience before that is everything towards children had been aimed to building their character and to, elevate their lives. And I started seeing this little creep of inappropriateness and, things like that. And actually, I watched the movie again a couple of years ago. And what was really worse was how the children talked to each other in the movie. Yeah. I thought, I don't ever want to watch this again. It's a kind of a fun Christmas movie, but once I, got into it. So really, it's just seeing how our culture has changed. And so I got interested in thinking about that. And then Stephen Covey wrote his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he does some pages, he does part of a chapter on personality versus character. And that personality is wonderful, but we've been stressing a big personality more instead of a person's character. And I've really thought about that. And he said, if you get the sequence wrong, you're going to not have a successful life. If you have a great personality, but no integrity or, things like that, then you will suffer. And we see that over and over in the news. So I really got interested in the character part. And then as we served a mission together, my husband and I, in 2022, and one morning I've been wanting to write a parenting book because I felt like I was always grateful for the church, but there were so many other options of what to focus on. And I really felt inspired. I had felt inspired to write about character, but then the Spirit's like, dinner is so important, and then this idea of teach character at dinner through these little stories. Yeah. So that's kind
combine the two.
Yeah, combine the two.
So Susan, when you say that you had always wanted to write a book, have you always been a writer or interested in writing? Where did that come from?
That's a great question, Janie. I was a school teacher previously, and I've always been a reader. I love to read. And I've just felt this mission to help families. And so I worked on a blog for a lot of years and just have really disciplined myself to write a couple hours a day.
Good for you. That's
so
awesome.
I don't know if actually doing the writing makes you a writer or if
it does, but reading helps you to write as well, right?
And reading helps a lot. And so I have really worked on it, but it's very fulfilling.
Why did you choose the title Character at Dinner, and how can family dinners shape character?
Like I said earlier, character was really important to me because I think one of the hardest things as parents is to focus on forming the inside of our children. I think we see the more we do for the inside and not focus so much on the exterior, but those good interior qualities of character, I think it really helps them be successful because they care less of what the world thinks. They have more courage and all those things. So I just thought sometimes we use dinner, it's kind of a throwaway.
Yes.
And we don't use it for the time. It's such a valuable time. And what I found is there's so many obstacles, as you know, gathering the family, planning the food, shopping for the food. And somebody that I quote in my book is a woman, a blogger, and she said, I was at a soccer game and somehow the concept of dinner came up, and she said, and I was talking to professional people, surgeons, a pilot, and they were just like, oh, the fridge is always empty. There's, it's too hard to cook. It's too hard to clean up. The kids are picky. And she said, I just really made it an intention. It was important to our family. And so she said, all of these people made sure their children went to soccer practice. That was a value for them.
Sure.
But they made it sound like it was an unattainable goal to have dinner with your children. But it's actually a time when they come to you and they're like, feed me, I'm starving. And while they're sitting there, you can have an interesting discussion. For a while, I was reading Reddit a lot, and they have a frugal thread. I would go on and see people's suggestions. And one father, I still remember, he was single and he was struggling. And he was saying, how can I serve dinner and it's expensive and I don't know how to cook. And people kind of walked him through that and gave helpful suggestions. And at the end of all of these suggestions, he said, and what do you even talk about with your children at dinner? Like why?
Wow.
Like why? And here you have this captive audience, especially when they're younger, they hang on every word.
Totally.
And so the idea of being able to teach character while you're sitting there and having a meaningful conversation, we're as modern families, there's stats that say 3 out of 10 American families are managing to have dinner together. And so we are losing this important time where we can really have an impact on our children.
It's such a lost art. It's something that back in the day was so normal. I mean, families had at least 2 meals a day probably together, and now they're struggling to even have one. And so I love your premise that, we take advantage of the time that you have. I love on the back of your book this quote that says, feed them physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually while you're there at the dinner table. And I love that. I thought that was so powerful. That's awesome.
Well, I also like the idea, Susan, as you said, that maybe families don't even know what to talk about at the dinner table. Janie and I always tell the story of being in Texas for Christmas a few years ago with our kids, and there was a family next to us on Christmas Eve. Now, Christmas Eve day, it was lunchtime, but all 5 of the family members, mother and father and their 3 teenagers, all just had their phone.
Yeah.
And they weren't...
I don't think one word was said.
There was no,
the 5 of them.
No, they just were on their phone, and I just kept watching
it. Was such a case study.
Wonder if they're going to ever say anything, but I wonder if part of that is they don't even know what to say, right? Moms and dads just don't know what to converse about.
So one thing, I got to experience kind of a cultural deep dive. We lived in Belgium for over a year in the 90s. And honestly, I mean, I came from Utah. I liked bulk shopping, get a big cart, fill your freezer, chicken nuggets, highly processed, whatever, and, it was the American efficiency, cheap, fast. And I entered this world where people would shop 2 or 3 times a week.
Yeah.
And get the freshest food and the highest quality they could afford. And then the average is like 1.5 to 3 hours for dinner.
Wow.
And even for lunch, they have long lunches.
Wow.
And I mean, it's like a cultural, like at 1:00, it's like a conductor raises his baton and everybody in France sits down and has lunch together, and we just don't have the time or don't make, and they never eat alone.
That was funny when we were in Italy in the fall, and that was when I think Mark's biggest takeaways. We'd go to dinner for 3 hours and just sit and talk, and it would take forever for them to bring the next course. And he was like, he's used to like in and out.
Like, are we going to leave here in a minute?
And I kept saying, Mark, this is Europe. Breathe and relax. This is an event. This isn't just to get fed. So
yes, yeah,
that's awesome.
Okay, Susan, a couple questions here. So
yes.
The book is actually Character at Dinner, Strengthening Latter-day Families Through Character Stories. Susan, first of all, where can people get the book?
Okay, it's on Amazon.
Okay, awesome.
Easy,
so that makes
breezy.
It super easy.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then second is how can we use the book? How can parents use your book to have meaningful conversations with their children? Tell us kind of how the book is used.
Okay, that's a great question. So Benjamin Franklin had, in the late 1700s, when he was 26, he wanted to improve his character. Like historically, people really cared.
Right.
Like, I don't want to feel good. I want to be good.
Right.
That's what they're, and we've kind of lost our way with that. Anyway, so he came up with 13 different virtues or character traits that he wanted to work on. And he would work on 1 a week. And then he thought, if I just keep up this rotation, I'm going to become a better person.
Right.
And he said, he said at the end of 10 years, he said, was I perfect? No, but I'm much happier and I'm a much better person. Wow. So it was a successful experiment on his own character. So this book is set up in the same weekly pattern. And honestly, there's no right or wrong way. I have written 7 stories for the week, and then there's questions after. So the questions are helpful in facilitating discussions. And then there's a little summary at the end of the week of each story if you want to go over it and ask questions. But I put all the stories at the front, and then in the back I have some chapters like why. Like one chapter is dinner together is a protective shield. And I would love to read you this quote by a Harvard psychologist if I could do that. So Dr. Ann Fischel is a family therapist, a clinical psychologist, associate clinical professor of psychology at the Harvard Medical School, and she's the director of the Family Dinner Project. And she actually jokes in a podcast I listened to that her job as a family therapist would go away if more families ate regularly together.
Oh, wow.
And then she goes on to say there have been more than 20 years of dozens of studies that document that family dinners are great for the body, the physical health, the brains and academic performance, and the spirit or the mental health. And in terms of nutrition, cardiovascular health is better in teens. There's lower fat and sugar and salt in home-cooked meals, even if you don't try that hard. And there's more fruit, fiber, and vegetables and protein in home-cooked meals and lower calories. Kids who grew up having family dinners when they're on their own tend to eat more healthily and to have lower rates of obesity. Then the mental health benefits are just incredible, she goes on. Mm-hmm. Regular family dinners are associated with lower rates of depression and anxiety and substance abuse, eating disorders, tobacco use, early teenage pregnancy, and higher rates of resilience and higher self-esteem.
Wow. That would put my counseling practice in jeopardy if people started eating together, right?
That would be great. So what are the character lessons that you've taught in your book, and then how do we use them as parents to teach our family?
This first book, so I actually have a very ambitious goal of I'd like to do a year's worth of stories, and so I have probably 6 months written.
Wow!
So I'm halfway there, but only one published. But so in this first one, there's 4 characters that I am highlighting, character traits. It's integrity, love, temperance, which is an old-fashioned word, but I think it's important for children to know that old-fashioned word. And then humility is the 4th character trait in this first book. Yeah. And so, for instance, in integrity, there's a story of a very smart man, but he was taking tests for other people. And so you can be smart, but not wise. Right. And so what a good discussion to have with your children, because he was paid $10,000 a test to take it. They were college entrance exams, so kids could get into really good schools.
Wow. That is a really good discussion.
And, I'm sure a 7 or 8-year-old hasn't even thought about this. Sure. But this discussion will prepare them when they go to school, and the person next to them will say, "Hey, can I look at your paper?" They can remember this story, and they have that mental model like, no, that's not a smart thing to do, because maybe you don't get caught right at first. Like, he went 8 years without getting caught. He made $240,000, wow. But then he got caught, and then he had to pay it all back. So it's just good for them to hear these stories.
Yes.
Life lessons.
So where did you find your stories to use? How did you gather all these stories?
Some are in the news, some are Aesop's fables, very traditional. In the week of temperance, I talk about Goldilocks and the 3 Bears.
One of my favorites.
That's a good old favorite on temperance, on sometimes what we want is not what is good for other people. And that's a good thing. Like, why is it wrong to go in somebody's house and eat their food and sleep on their beds? And, and it's a good discussion and a fun discussion at dinner. And then my last example from the first book is in humility. And there's a great story I got from the Church News. And it's, I titled it The Ugly Coat. And it was about a missionary who, when she was 12, she'd gone coat shopping and found this beautiful red coat with this trim. And, of course, it was too much money, but she thought, oh, what a beautiful coat. And then years later, she was a convert to the church, and she met a grandmother that was visiting the United States. So she was going to Brazil, and she met this grandmother who said, "You're going to be in my mission, and please look me up." And so they had this little connection, and she thought, great. So when she got to her mission, and she got her mission, her companion, she went to visit the grandmother, and the grandmother noticed that she kind of had a thin coat, and the grandmother said, "I would love to make you a coat." And immediately this woman, Rochelle, thought of the beautiful coat she saw when she was 12, and she thought, oh, it's going to be awesome. And this is the week of humility. Right. So I'm leading you up to a humble moment. But she went to get the coat. The grandmother said, come back a week later, and she went to get the coat, and it was made of like car upholstery fabric. Oh. It was this brown, thick, ugly. And Rochelle, the new missionary, looked at it like, I don't want to wear that coat. But she realized that this grandmother had really done her a service, and she wore it under her raincoat and humbled herself because she didn't want to hurt the grandmother's feelings. Anyway, and I'm reading from the story now. She said she had to work to control her tears and realized she would not be getting the coat of her dreams. Though Rochelle was very disappointed, she did not show it. She said she wore that ugly coat not only in this kind lady's city, but during her whole mission. She layered it over sweaters and under her overcoat, and it kept her very warm through the cold, wet winter. Every time she wore it, she thought of the elderly sister's sacrifice and thoughtfulness towards her. This coat taught Rochelle about humility and gratitude. If she had been too proud to wear it, she would have frozen in the bitter cold. It kept her so warm and happy that she was grateful every time she wore it.
Oh,
wow.
What a beautiful story.
Well, Susan, so what inspired you to teach character through storytelling?
I was very blessed to have a mother who taught through stories. And some of my greatest testimony building times were when my mother would tell me about her mother, who had some rentals during the Great Depression. And she was so strong on paying her tithing that she would tell her daughters, it's like she'd be out in the neighborhood and something would show up she could use for her rentals. And she would stop and say to these daughters, her 5 daughters, I am so glad I paid my tithing.
Yeah.
Look at what Heavenly Father has put in my path. And these children would look up at her and say, oh, yes, we're being so blessed.
Right.
You know, and
she was good at those teaching moments.
Yes.
Oh.
My mother would tell me those stories, and I didn't know my grandmother very well. I was the 4th child of a 4th child, and so she was older when I was kind of, aware. But these stories from my mother really cemented so many things for me, and really family stories, if you can tell them at dinner or any time, are really the golden stories for your children.
And we know that there's research that tells us this, right? That this is one of the ways to connect our children to their identity, right, and to their heritages as you share those family stories. In other words, that blood is in them.
Right. And it gives them a resilience like, oh, if grandpa can recover from that devastating accident or that terrible financial situation, I can recover or I can have courage.
And if grandma can pay her tithing and attributes it to so many blessings, then hopefully our children will learn that lesson and realize that tithing is such a blessing and learn from these experiences that we share from our ancestors and family members, those that went before us, that we can learn such incredible lessons from. What a great story. Susan, if families remember one lesson from character at dinner, what should it be?
I think the important lesson is if it's going to happen, you have to fight through all the obstacles, because it's so easy not to have it happen, but you're letting a gold mine slip between your fingers.
Right. So this idea of intentionality and fighting for this family time that's so sacred and precious.
Prioritizing that special dinner time and using it not just to shove food down people's throat, but to really take advantage. I love that.
There's a book called The Intentional Family that Janet Erickson talked about at our...
Bill Doherty. Yeah.
Yes. He says it takes intentionality, which means repeated, coordinated, and meaningful for it to become a ritual. Right. And so we can do that as parents. We can really learn to simplify. We can involve our children. It's hard at first to involve our children, but it actually gets easier as we involve our children. I'll never forget, you had a 5th Sunday, when Mark was the bishop of our ward, he had a 5th Sunday and he invited a family to come up and talk about how they did family dinner. And they talked about how the husband wanted a big dinner with company and relatives visiting from out of town. And Lisa said, Sunday is a day of rest, and I don't want a big family dinner. And so Dave got very intentional and creative, and he gave every child a job for the whole year. And so the 3-year-old could fill the glasses, the 5-year-old could put the forks and knives on the table, the 8-year-old could put the vegetable in the boiling water under supervision. You know, honestly, they can do a lot.
Sure.
And just threw the whole family. And the only thing Lisa, the mother, had to do was to make a salad every Sunday. So you can really get creative and make this happen.
I love that word, intentional. That's a word that we talk about a lot on here, because I think nowadays with our time commitments, all the stress, that everything that's coming at us in this crazy life, that this generation that we live, we have to be intentional to find family time. We have to be intentional to prioritize family, to prioritize teaching our children the gospel, teaching our children character. And so I love that. I love that you brought that.
Well, I love that Susan called it a gold mine, right? That we're letting slip through our fingers, because I don't think most of us understand the power that comes from having these family meals together, because really that is where this intergenerational transmission of values and beliefs, and even if it's just humor, and I know, and one of our children, they do a good job of, okay, high and low for today. They kind of come in with that. That's kind of the way they do it, which is super easy. What was the best thing that happened today? What was the worst thing? Every kid can go around and do something like that. And so a lot of times it doesn't take tons of effort and energy. It's just, like you said, Janie, making it a priority.
And I think even too I think when we think of mealtime, we have to have the full place settings and the napkins, and we have to be cooking for 2 hours. And I think even if we have Costco pizza, but we're all around the table and we're talking,
absolutely,
it doesn't have to be this grandiose thing. I mean, hopefully we're, adding some vegetables or something to that. But you know what I mean? I don't think it has to be this, because we don't have that time every night. It doesn't have to be a 2-hour block either. It could be, even if we took a half an hour to sit down as a family, eat before everybody's scattered, I think.
Well, even as families are going through the drive-through, bring it home and sit around the table, right? And have those conversations.
Or if you're at soccer practice, sit around a blanket and together as a family and talk. I mean, there's so many ways to be creative, but take advantage of that time.
I've been trying to help my adult children have dinner and teach them the importance of it. Yeah. And my son Chase has done really well and made it a priority. And they really struggled. And he would share the struggle with me of getting it together, but now he's learned the power of the crock pot.
I love it.
In the morning. And they recently had a friend over of their 14-year-olds for dinner, and the friend said, "I like eating over your house because it's actually dinner." And it just, he has 2 busy parents, one's a surgeon, one's a lawyer. And Chase is not a surgeon or a lawyer. I mean, he's a computer programmer, but they're just it's the intentionality. They're like, we can manage this every day. Yeah. And just it's filling all those cracks in those teenagers,
Sure.
and those children. So anyway, I just love that. So back to that chapter called Dinner is a Protective Shield. I think some of the stories in this book talk about saying no to smoking and how to do that, even when there's bullies,
Yeah.
Or I actually tell a personal story of saying no to alcohol as a freshman in high school and being ridiculed. And so this protective shield, you're actually helping them with all these different things that can happen to them, and they'll know what to say instead of feeling like a victim or they don't have any
They're just frozen.
Idea. Frozen. That's the word I was looking for. So it's really, like I said, it's this gold mine where you're actually in a fun discussion while you're eating, while you're loving all of your children and responding to them. It's building these values. And there's scriptural stories. I didn't make it for LDS families because I wanted my authentic voice.
Right.
And there's a lot of, Book of Mormon stories of prophets and of other women, LDS women in the book. So it is a protective shield as we tell these stories and reinforce what's important and how we shape the inside of ourselves.
I love that so much because that's how I learn. I learn through stories. As I realize I really gravitate towards stories and they really speak to me. And so I love this and I'm so grateful that you have put this together. So Susan, we always end with an LDS, let's do something. Can you think of something that we could invite people to do?
Yes, I would invite you to start with one dinner at home with some, and they don't have to be stories from my book, any family story that you want to give or a scripture story, but you'll just see how your children will stop eating and look at you and they're listening and they're wanting to know more and they're thirsty for knowledge and for spiritual, strength and all those things that you'll be giving them through these stories. Just start with one meal.
That's beautiful. And in conclusion, just a reminder that this book is called Character at Dinner, Strengthening Latter-day Saint Families Through Character Stories. And you will love this book. It's beautiful and just amazing stories by Susan H. Christensen. Again, you can find that on Amazon.
And Susan, once again, thank you so much for being with us today. This was super informative and enlightening, and we're so grateful for you and the work you've done in this area. It's great stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with both of you.
Thank you for being here.
Well, everyone, have a wonderful week. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.